Yes, we can hear you and you can see you as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Then good morning and good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. My name is Marina Hausen, and thanks a lot for having me. I work for Siemens AG. I'm located in Germany, Munich, and I'm head of export control regulations and policies team for Siemens AG globally. This is actually the earliest presentation I have ever given in my life. So maybe let's start straight ahead and start with a couple of words about Siemens as a company. What do we do? Siemens is a very old company that has existed for over 170 years now. It was founded by three Siemens brothers, already as the global company in those days. So Siemens had operations from the very beginning in Germany, in England, and in Russia. And since then, a history of innovation has been rich in company's history, starting with the first pointer telegraph, and then moving on in 1870s with the first electric railway, or the first magnetic resonance imaging scanner in the 80s. And this history continues gladly until today. So these days, Siemens is a global leading technology company with operations in a lot of countries in the world, actually in all the regions, with around 300,000 employees. And here you see the business numbers, 57 billions of revenue it was in 2020. What does Siemens do these days? Actually, Siemens is a group of companies with Siemens AG, the company that I work for, focusing on digital transformation of industry automation, but also the division of smart infrastructure, so connected devices, Internet of Things, smart buildings, and mobility, railway networks, digitizing mobility. Also, Siemens Healthineers is a separate company focusing on healthcare systems, which is also very strong in Korea, so you may know it as well. And Siemens Energy, which was separated last year and has its focus on energy production and transformation generation. Siemens has a long also history in Korea, has been present in the country for many years now. It has a large presence of over 2,000 people. And we have colleagues in multiple cities in Korea with sales and head offices in Seoul, but also in Pyeongtaek. We have production and research and development sites for smart infrastructure, and Siemens Healthineers in multiple locations in Korea. Compliance is very important for Siemens. Integrity matters is one of our main mottos. Siemens has been achieving high rankings in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index in the category of compliance since 2009. And the company adheres to the highest ethical and moral standards in doing business. Only clean business is our business. And this also applies to the trade compliance, which for us includes export control, embargo, and sanctions regulations. All of these areas are managed within Siemens by the Export Control Organization. And the Export Control Organization is part of the overall compliance organization, together with the other areas of activity such as anti-corruption, anti-money laundering, antitrust, human rights, or data privacy, as you see here. On the left-hand side, I put a high-level scheme describing how the Export Control Organization is set up. So we have a global team of colleagues all over the world, overall over 100 colleagues globally. And it's very important to have these experts on site who are also experts in the local regulations in the countries where Siemens is operating in. We have the Export Control Commissioner as head of the global organization, and who has a direct link to the Export Control Officer, who is a board member of the Siemens board. And this is actually a specific of the German regulations. Under German regulations, a company must assign someone from the top management or from the board as the export control officer, who would be personally responsible for the export control topics if a company exports dual use items or military items or uses export licenses. So this is how we operate as the organization. And of course, the base for our work is the internal control program, Export Control. We're constantly developing it and adapting it to the changing requirements that we have from our global business. As you can see here, these are the three main elements that we always keep in mind. Of course, preventive element is, you might say, the most important one. These are the measures that we put in place in order to ensure that all regulations are observed, all relevant regulations are observed, and no violations take place. So these are, for instance, risk management, policies and procedures, processes that we have in place, transactional screening, automated controls, training. So all of that, all of what we understand as the assurance framework. But then, of course, it's very important to have the second component recognized, meaning that we need an assurance function which would validate, verify how effective are the preventive measures that we put in place. So we have audits, internal, external, reviews, self-assessments. We have also with internal whistleblowing channels, as it says here, tell us, or an ombudsperson where employees can report misconduct. And we have an internal investigation department within the compliance organization who would follow up on such messages, reports, would investigate the cases, find out the root cause. And then, of course, last but not least, the react part is very important because once a misstate, let's say a failure in the system or a misconduct has been identified, it's very important to have clear consequences and clear reactions to help prevent such violations in the future. It's important to address such misconduct and to perform remedy work to solve identified problems and deficiencies. And in the center of all of that, I put management responsibility because this is what we see every day in our work. It's very important to have top management commitment to compliance, and we do have it at Siemens. So our management is strongly committed to trade compliance and communicates it responsibly in the organization, which helps us as a function a lot. So here's a glimpse at the internal control program export control at Siemens. How does it look like? This is our homepage where each employee could go. It's open for everyone and it has a multitude of elements. But its main purpose is, of course, to keep the professional community of export control colleagues informed, but also business colleagues informed about the changes, the processes, and the requirements. Let's take a detailed look. What does it consist of? So as I mentioned, Siemens is a company operating globally. Therefore, we consider national regulations from all the countries that we are operating in our internal control program. Since we are based in Germany and a lot of our production sites are in Europe, of course, European export controls are a strong part of it. And the elements of the internal control program, you will probably recognize them. Probably you have similar ones. Why is that? Because European authorities, US authorities, but also the export control authorities in a lot of countries actually predefine them, right? They say which element should be included in the ICP, and we follow this guidance, of course, and it helps us in our processes. So first, for sure, is guidance and work instructions. So we have a condensed summary of relevant legal regulations in our ICP, and we have work instructions and process descriptions, who needs to do what and when. And then very important, transactional screening. We have central tools in place for global use. They are maintained and managed centrally so that all Siemens businesses anywhere in the world use the same solution with the same contents and get the same results. Our tools are integrated in the ERP processes. We are going to take a look at them in a second. This is very important and very helpful because this way we can have direct controls of transactions, direct blocks in the process when required. Training and awareness is a very important part of the ICP. We have a multi-level system of training, so to say. For instance, we have mandatory global awareness training for each and every employee at Siemens who has a laptop, who has access to the company network. We have web-based trainings for specific target groups, which are specifically relevant for export control, such as sales, procurement, HR. And we have in-person tailored trainings for high-risk areas, such as, for instance, R&D, engineering, IT. So colleagues who deal with complex export control topics, such as, for instance, encryption. Risk assessment is also a very important part of the ICP. We have a regular global risk assessment for each relevant company in the Siemens group, where we take a look, okay, what kind of business do they have, which kind of countries do they deal with, what kind of products do they export, do they sell within the country, so what is the risk level, and this helps to assess which measures are required for those companies and those countries. We also have regular monitoring of the export control regulations in all the countries where Siemens is present at. And this is a digitized, centralized process of monitoring these regulations, because we need to be sure that in each and every country where we operate in, we are aware of the relevant regulations so that we can comply accordingly. Monitoring and audits, an important function to make sure that the whole system works properly. We have yearly global audits by the independent internal audit department. So each and every year we get, I don't know, 10, 13 audits on different areas of export control internally. And this also helps to keep the system effective, efficient, find weak spots and fix them. We also have a continuous monitoring and self-assessment framework where the export control colleagues are performing self-assessments, and also regular external audits. For instance, in Germany, this is part of the system, so to say. We are constantly getting audited by the export control and customs authorities, and in some other countries, this happens regularly as well. Yeah, and last but not least, actually, it's the basis of the whole system, is our experts organization, our export control experts globally. As I mentioned before, it's a global team of experts. We work cross-border in distributed teams, and it's very important for us to keep in touch, to keep information and flowing, and the network exchanging about the new developments, technological, regulatory, and so on, so that everyone stays informed and connected. Maybe a drill down on the transactional screening, because of course this is the most important operational topic, right? So how exactly do we do it? So how exactly do we control our transactions? And here you would recognize the 4 main dimensions which are relevant for export controls, embargoes, and sanctions. This is what do we export, where do we export it to, who is our customer, and what is going to be the end use. These are the 4 things that we always need to consider. And for them, I have just put a couple of examples here because we have a very, very elaborate system in place. For instance, in order to control unauthorized exports of the listed goods, and we do have a lot of dual use goods in our portfolio, we have a classification, 100% classification of all the products that we export, which is performed by the export control experts, or sometimes for easier products also by the colleagues from business. We have automated checks for license requirements in different legal areas. For instance, also the Korean regulations are implemented in our digital export control system, and the checks can be performed automatically depending on the classification. We also even have automated assignment of general licenses and license exceptions, because, for instance, out of Germany, we use a lot of so-called general authorizations for exports. Then here on the right-hand side, the control of deliveries to embargoed countries. What do we do here? We have automated address screening in place. We also have, since pretty recently for our software business, which is also growing very fast, geo-IP blocking. So we identify IP addresses of the users who access our servers and can define from which country they come and see whether a block is required in order to perform a control measure. Control of deliveries to sanctioned parties. We, of course, perform the regular sanctioned party name screening, which I guess a lot of you do as well. But we have also an automated screening in place against the so-called 50% rule, so looking for companies which are in majority ownership of sanctioned companies or individuals, for instance. And we have a domain screening in place, identifying domains, email domains of the users who belong to sanctioned entities, for instance. And in order to prevent critical use, we have a very unique system in place, which I think doesn't exist on the market so often, as far as we know. It's a self-developed system which enables dynamic generation of questionnaires per transaction based on the partners and countries involved, covering embargo regulations for a specific country. We use master data categorization, so KYC, know your customer. When a new customer is created, he is directly categorized in the system. We have keyword search for critical words in the company name, such as, I don't know, defense, atomic, nuclear, these kind of things. Of course, we also use end-use certification and strong contract language in order to safeguard our business in the critical areas. And then last but not least, how are all these controls possible in all these millions and millions of transactions that we have worldwide? Of course, only with the use of digital tools. The tools are critical to ensure compliance with the regulations. Automated controls ensure consistency of processes and high level of assurance, because we have the same rules applied in each and every country. The controls are very strong and implemented centrally in the system, so that all the countries use the same tools and the same processes. We are constantly developing and updating them to adapt them to the changing legal requirements and the business needs. You see here a couple of tools that we have in place. They're actually all in-house developed, specific for us, specific for our needs. And what's very important is that they are integrated into the ERP systems where all the business transactions take place. That's very important, so that the blocks can be set if required, if there are red flags, if there are indications that a license is required or a transaction is maybe prohibited, and those blocks can be removed or released, so to say, only by the authorized export control employees. And this system overall works very well for us. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention and for having me. And I hope one day we can meet in person at one of these conferences and talk more about the interesting export control topics. So here are my contacts. Don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you very much for your attention.